Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet, brought to you by fanvice.com. A lot of free content and paywall content there as well. I'm Pierce Dietrich at Race for the Prize. Today we're going to take a more advanced look at the spreadsheet and how you can specifically use it to build better lineups. This video is going to focus on current form. This is one of the four variables you can see on the screen, and one of probably the two biggest variables in making better picks. The others would be practice. Practice and current form are your number two weighted factors. Today we'll do current form. What is current form? That simply means how well a driver has been running lately. We're not going to look at their entire history. We may not even look at their entire season. We're going to do what they've been doing lately. And for some people, they draw the line in the sand at different spots. Some people only go back 15 races. Some people only go back 10 races. Some people will only go back 7 races at a specific track. It is completely up to you. You will find what works best for you. And a lot of times it depends on what point in the season we're in, at what track we're at. All those things will have to come into play. But again, it still all comes down to this central idea of too much information. You have to be able to thin slice. You got to be able to separate what is important and throw away the rest. Because if you're looking at a lot of the noise, or you're weighing every single factor, you're going to make poor decisions. You're going to be led down the wrong route. Your instincts are probably going to be distracted. So you want to take away some of the noise and find what matters. So when we look at current form, at least specifically, when I do it, I go to the spreadsheet. I can look here, current form. I can see all the races. That is way too much. I don't really need to know what happened at Talladega in the spring. I don't need to know, for the most part, what happened at Kansas in the spring, unless, of course, we're at the Kansas race in the fall. Then I probably will look back at it. But some of these things I just don't trust as much, because so much changes throughout the year. The car's setup change. Teams figure things out. Teams fall behind. And stuff that happens in the spring, a lot of times it doesn't bear much importance when we look at the fall races. So everybody's going to decide what they think is important, but the idea is we at least need to know what we can throw out. Now, I want to go to Super Page 2, not Super Page 1, because Super Page 2, as I mentioned in the earlier video, gives me average running position, and average running position is a much better instrument or measure than finishing position. Finishing position can be misleading. Some of these guys have really good finishes, although they weren't having the best race. They just got lucky with a wreck at the end, or they got lucky with a late race caution. And some of these guys have really poor results, although maybe they had a really good race. And, well, not these two, because Kozlowski had bad races in those races. But some of these drivers have I guess Denny Hamlin, who got wrecked. No, I think he had a bad Phoenix race too. So those are bad examples, but you understand what I'm saying. Some people will run in the top 10 all day and they'll get a flat tire at the end and have a really poor result. So the finish position will be bad, but their average position will be pretty good. And it'll show us that, well, for the most part, the driver had a good day. It was just luck. So average running position on Super Page 2 does the best at removing luck from the equation. So we're looking at the Homestead race from 2017. If I were to make picks from the Homestead 2017 race, there's different ways that you can look at it. Some people are going to look at the last 10 to 15 races completely. The first one that you absolutely could get rid of if we're looking at current form is Talladega. And I'm just going to hide this because Talladega just means nothing. The restrictor plate races are worthless. They shouldn't even be included in the sheet, but if I didn't put them in the sheet, people would say, where's the Talladega race in the sheet? So I would obviously get rid of that. I will get rid of Phoenix as well, because it's a short track that really does not resemble the racing. Easily Martinsville, it has nothing to do with, it's another really small short track, paperclip size, no bearing on Homestead. And for that matter, I probably can get rid of all the short tracks. I want to see what these drivers, I want to see their current form at the most recent intermediate tracks. And we have a pretty good sample size of intermediate tracks that I can get rid of these. New Hampshire's a very flat short track. Some people could argue that you could keep Dover in. That's up to you. Dover is a short track, but it's high banked. And a lot of the setups that go into Charlotte the following week are very similar to the setups in Dover. But to me, I'm going to more than likely dump this one. I think it's just a little bit too much noise, and it's not going to kill me. I don't have it in there. Sure, it's in my conscience. It's weighing a little bit in the back of my head. I can remember what happened at that Dover race, but I don't really need it. Darlington, Chicago, Charlotte, Kansas, Texas, Homestead. These are basically the last, well, obviously I won the Homestead, but I've got 5 intermediate tracks within the last 2.5 months leading up to the Homestead race that give me a pretty good idea of what kind of setups in an intermediate track, who's driving well at the intermediate tracks. These are really the numbers that I want to weigh when I say, okay, who has good current form? Who is running well at the intermediate tracks? Who's finding their way into the top 10 consistently? Who's running fast laps, which is really important, and laps led? For the most part, you're going to have a good idea of who's a top 10 car, a top 20 car already. And if you look at these numbers, you're going to quickly be able to figure it out. What we really are digging deep into with current form here is to find out which cars are the fastest, which cars will score the most points. Clearly, you're going to see Kevin Harvick is really fast at this point. And if you remember the 2017 season, Harvick in the new Ford, it wasn't a new Ford, but the team changed from Chevys to Ford in the 2017 season. And so there was definitely some growing pains where they just didn't have the speed that other cars had consistently. It was a step back for SHR, and you could tell week in, week out. But when it came time for the playoffs, they clearly knew what adjustments to make, and the car switched. And if you were quick to figure this out at Chicago, and you made the assumption that they fixed their issues, then you did really well at Charlotte, Kansas, Texas. But after he ran well at Chicago and at Charlotte, you absolutely had to realize that you've got to play this guy at Kansas, Texas, and even Homestead, because they had figured it out. And you figured that out by understanding the current form and seeing that teams have discovered speed. With Truex, you don't just have the current form. You could go all the way back and know that he's been good all year. And the opposite is true. You could see that Brad Keselowski, even though he was in a championship race in Homestead, you could look at his current form and just know that maybe he's a top 10 car. That's great, but that doesn't do much for us in fantasy, especially at his price tag. He is not the fastest car, and we could go back through the whole year and expand that current form to say, well, our theory based on current form is he's just not that fast at these intermediate tracks. Let's look at a little bit more information, a little more data, and you'll see that, yeah, he just has not had the car this year. Matt Kenseth looks okay, but we could expand it further and say, well, he's just okay. We don't think he's going to be elite. But by looking at current form, we can say, all right, we got Martin Truex Jr. for sure. We got Kyle Busch for sure. Now, some people are going to see the 12s, the 19s, and the 23s in the current form. Another thing that is helpful with current form, by just looking at the most recent races, a lot of the most recent races are going to be in your memory. If they're not in your memory, then they will appear in the articles, or the people talking in Slack chats or on Twitter will still remember this, and the information about these specific races will still be floating around. If you look at every race for the entire season, often it is hard to remember every single point of the race. But just looking at current form, we could go to the Chicago race, and at the end of the season, you could remember that, hey, Kyle Busch got hit with a double penalty that pretty much ended his race, and there was only there was, I think, 2 cautions in the entire race. So he went laps down, and that pretty much ruined what he should have been the best car. But penalties and a pit road issue ruined his day. And then you look at Charlotte, and you'll remember, because we could still recall this information, Charlotte, they only had 30 minutes of practice time, and in that 30 minutes of practice time, Kyle Busch hit the wall, then practice was shut down because of rain, then they went immediately into the race. So he had a damaged car going into a racetrack where in the only 30 minutes he had run, he had slammed into the wall, so it seemed pretty obvious that he would hit the wall again, and it was definitely another fade. Texas, before the Texas race, he had already qualified for the championship. His spot at Homestead was already locked up. And he had mentioned before the race, we don't care about Texas. We're already looking ahead to Homestead. And sure enough, in the first lap of the race, Kyle Busch got into a wreck. They look at the other numbers, and they're pretty good. You can really only do that if you're looking at current form. It's very hard to recall every single person, why their numbers might drop or why their numbers might be exceptional. Like you'd say, oh, Ryan Blaney had a really, really good race at Kansas. What's the deal there? Well, he was starting on the pole, and as we know, in the intermediate tracks with this model of car, being in clean air is absolutely important. It is basically a lock that you're going to run up front and run those laps left. But it's hard probably for a lot of people to be able to go back and find these specific numbers and understand why they are. You can't just make the assumption that Ryan Blaney's really good because of this one day. Well, there are underlying circumstances for all these. But if you only look at current form, you usually have a good idea of knowing which numbers to trust and which numbers that you can throw out because it may just be noise. So that's what current form is. You change out based on the tracks. You don't always have to do just intermediate. You could look at some of the short tracks. You could look at the short tracks. If we were at a short track, you could possibly look at the intermediate tracks. It's really up to you. And when we get to some of these unique tracks where we go to a Pocono, where there really aren't a lot of tracks designed like Pocono, then you're going to have to trust short track results. You're going to have to trust some of the intermediate track results. But because you're looking at different variables, then maybe when we consider the different factors that we use to determine driver success, maybe we bump current form down a little bit at Pocono. Maybe we'd bump current form down a little bit at Indianapolis, or tracks that are peculiar, and we can jump practice speed up a little bit. Or we jump track history up because Pocono is such an interesting, different, unique track, then maybe because past success at that specific track, we should weigh that a little bit more. Or if it's a track like Texas, we see here where Texas is a one groove racetrack right now, where it's almost impossible to pass, and they're going to turn laps. Starting position is huge. If a car starts inside the top 20, they're likely not going to get lapped. They're going to be able to hang on that lead lap all day. And at the end, they're going to be in the top 20 with a chance to move. Whereas you got a car that starts 28th that has pretty good speed, but they're just not going to be able to make passes on the one groove racetrack. And wouldn't you know it, before long, they end up a lap down, even though in practice and throughout track history, if you look at the past, they were a better car than that guy starting 19th. But because of the starting position alone at this specific track on that specific day, the car 19th just was able to stay in the same position, didn't move up, didn't really move back so much. But as the green flag runs turned into yellow flag runs, and the green flag runs and the other yellow flag runs, he just ends up staying up front the entire day. And the better car doesn't have the better race because of the starting position. Those are things that you weigh in, but this video is mainly for current form and determining, what do I throw out, what do I look at. Me specifically at this racetrack at Homestead, I just looked at the past couple intermediate track races, and that really helped me identify who were the fastest cars, especially in terms of fast laps and laps led. When I have to make picks for value and picks for medium range, possibly get some place differential, then I'm going to have to weigh starting position a little bit more. So there it is. There's current form. That's what that means. That's how we look at it. And again, that's how we change it around at specific tracks. Check out fanvice.com. And like I said, a lot of free content and paywall content there as well. Follow me on Twitter at Race for the Prize.